In my earlier talk on the subject of superconsciousness through meditation, you will remember I described the nature of peak experience, associated with peak experience, but not always part of it, is what we call ecstasy. If ever there were anything to indicate teleology in the structure of our universe, that is, that there is a divine architect, it must surely be the systems of reward that exist. There are systems of reward which assist the lowest of the animal kingdom to put together an instinctual pattern. In our own kingdom, the human, we have a system of ecstatic reward for those who are engaged in procreation. The reward for perpetuating the species. Ecstatic experience. And it would seem that when we undertake certain giant steps into higher consciousness, there again occur ecstatic experiences which indicate a reward once more at a higher level. It is a very comforting thing to consider that there may indeed be a rewarder of effort. We hear a lot about karma, and we're comforted to think that the pain we have suffered, the struggles we have undergone, are taken into account, that everything is compensated for, and we don't have to pursue it with some intent to take revenge. The gods take care of it through the action of the lords of karma. And it is equally comforting to feel that your struggles towards a world within ours or beyond ours are also rewardable. And ecstasy is not just a passing accompaniment to spiritual struggle, like orgasm is to sex. Ecstasy rewards in many ways. It rewards not only through the ecstatic, you can only describe it as feeling, we have no other words for it, but it rewards in ways which are not quite so obvious. First of all, once you have had the ecstatic experience, it changes your life and continues to influence your life in such a way that changes which were unimaginable earlier can now be undertaken. And how necessary those changes are if we are to grow. As I always say, when you feel sorry for yourselves, take a magnifying glass and look at the bud of a rose that is opening, and you will see their cells being torn to shreds. Change is necessary for the bud to open, for the flower to bloom. Change is necessary for man to come into flowering perfection. He has traveled a long way along that path of perfection, towards perfection. He has not reached in his kingdom as far as the plant kingdom has, in its angiosperms, which are flowering all around us all the time, and we are encouraging them to do just that. But we have gone a long measure of the way. And so ecstasy can provide us with impetuses that enable us to overcome what would have been incredibly difficult obstacles. The ecstatic experience, even if it is only a mild one, a thrill down the spine at the sound of an opera or a concerto, ecstasy rewards in many ways and helps us, for instance, to bear the stress, to bear the increased stress of having to stand on your own and take on two worlds at once. The stress that comes from catharsis, the bringing up of all that is in you that is good and all that is difficult or bad or evil, if you like to use such words. And ecstasy assists that. It assists you when you are in isolation, as you must be. Esotericism demands a degree of isolation. It's very nice to think that we should have the esoteric for families, and there's nothing barring the family, but it don't work like that. All right for church and Sunday mornings and Sunday school for the kids and catechism for somebody else, and fine, but it doesn't work for those who tread the mystical path. The mystical path is a path. Doesn't matter what mysticism you're dealing with. It is a path. It is a way. And that way must be trodden alone so that you conquer the obstacles and learn by them. And there is loneliness on the path. Great loneliness. And these are the battles that you have to fight. Fight the battle of loneliness and overcome it so that in the end loneliness is a joy to you, the ability to be alone and to recognize what you are. Paracelsus had ecstatic experiences. He'd go up into the mountains and just above cloud line, where there was alternating bright sun and misty cloud, he would have his experiences and be refreshed by them. Just consider the enthusiasm, the delight contained in his credo when he describes what he wants to be as a doctor. This is my vow, to perfect my medical art and never to swerve from it, so long as God grants me my office, and to oppose all false medicine and teachings. Then to love the sick, each and all of them, more than if my own body were at stake. Not to judge anything superficially, but by symptoms. Not to administer any medicine without understanding, not to collect any money without earning it, not to trust any apothecary, nor to do violence to any child, not to guess but to know. There is nothing in me except the will to discover the best that medicine can do, the best there is in nature, the best that the nature of the earth truly intends for the sick. Thus I say, nothing comes from me, everything comes from nature, of which I too am a part. That's not just something hooked up for an advert somewhere. He believed it. And it's that sort of thing that results from the ecstatic experience. So where is the static experience had? In the human physical body. Where is it had? There are some tissues of the human body that are sacred. And it's worthwhile knowing what sacred tissue means. There are two kinds of elementals, and I have seen them, building the physical tissues of the body. In the astral body, the elementals that construct the emotional nature of man are involuting. They are descending into grosser and grosser forms. And for you to express yourself grossly emotionally is to provide such elementals on the involutionary arc with the capacity to become more spiritual, which for them is to become denser and grosser. And so the loss of temper, the emotional hemorrhage here and there, the emotional tyranny that you may exercise or willingly become a party to. These things don't do much for your emotional consciousness, but they do a lot for the elemental. The same is not quite so true for the human body. The human body has twin streams, evolutionary and involutionary lives building its tissues. I don't want to be sidetracked tonight, so let me just say this, that the overwhelming number of elemental lives using physical human bodies are involving. And this is why we grieve over the fact that there is so little support for the true mystics in this world. The materialists thrive in the world not so much because they are emblamored by the useless paraphernalia of transient material things, but they thrive because the overwhelming life that passes through their bodies is involutionary and supports that kind of attitude which they have. Now, in the human body, there is some tissues that are evolutionary in the sense that their lives are evolving. The elemental lives are evolving. There are about 10 such sacred tissues. 10 such sacred tissues. And the beauty of the method that we use in our particular school or group is that it is backed by the traditional teaching of great teachers like Madame Blavatsky in her Secret Doctrine, by Annie Besant in her Study in Consciousness, by C.W. Leadbeater in his Masters in the Path, by Alice Bailey in her treatise on white magic. We're part of a stream. And what they teach, I merely carry forward, putting it into the language of the day. I am interested in elementals. Fascinated by the way the elementals maintain the life of the cells in the kidney. My speciality. Kidney being an important organ. In our age that we're coming into, where man can easily live to 150 years, the grandchildren, your grandchildren, or the babies of today can easily live to 150 years. What will kill them? One of the vital organs of the body, the heart or the lungs or the kidney. And especially when the kidneys are required to filter out the toxins from the body, and more especially recently the harmful side products of drugs, they're an important organ. And if we can extend the resilience and the life of the kidneys, that 150 years will be close. And if we can do the same thing for other organs, then hundreds of years is also possible if we want it. And so the human body has got tissues that are evolving. And the lives that use them, especially their cells, the cells of those tissues, are solar devas. Solar devas, their origin is from the sun. Whereas Madame Blavatsky will tell you that the involving devas that I have mentioned earlier are lunar petries. They are involving devas of the moon, long since lost their anchorage on the moon, anchored now on the earth. The solar and the lunar petries. And so we have this concept straight away that within us, this remarkable structure which we call the human body, within it, there are these two streams. Man, one of the principles of the universe. There's no need to describe the evolution of man's original nature. He is a principle of the universe. When that principle anchors itself on any of the planets and is capable of surviving there, there is modification of the principle of man. Modification all the way down. From the perfected universal principle of man, which is modified down right through the anthropoids, through the lower kingdoms of nature, down to unicellular structures. Don't want to get involved in anthropogenesis tonight. We are talking about the vagus nerve here tonight, which is the instrument of ecstasy. It is the instrument which enables powerful, fiery forces, which we associate with solar devas, to enter the very core of man's being. Never mind their performance on higher planes, but at the physical level. The thrill of their entry is felt on the spine, down the spine. And that is for almost any person, Mr. Average on the planet, if you like. But where the individual is evolving, where he is consciously intervening in his spiritual unfoldment, in his evolution, intending thereby to hasten it, you have special structures for that purpose, which have been developed by such individuals through countless lives here and on other planets. And we're talking about, in particular, the vagus nerve, but there are 8 or so other structures in the body which are evolving, like the pineal gland, in its return so we talk about the vagus nerve. Vagus, why vagus? It's the 10th cranial nerve, 12 nerves coming out of the brain. 12 nerves coming out of the brain. These nerves have been with us all along through countless millennia. But the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve, is called vagus because of its diffuse nature. Its diffuse nature and its many, 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 many parts to it. No other nerve of the body ramifies and insinuates itself so subtly into the tissues of the body as the vagus nerve does. So subtle, tiny are these nerve processes as they enter various organs that we will hear about, that as a physiologist you must wonder how they could possibly carry the electrical currents that the great giant nerves like the sciatic nerve carry. These subtle little processes. And we, the mystics, believe that they carry fire, spiritual fire. Never mind their ordinary activities, which are well known and written up in any anatomy book. They carry fiery processes, both ways, two ways. And it is because of this, I would say mercifully, that Eastern mystics have overlooked the vagus altogether. Maybe they have referred to its activities, but certainly not anatomically. And in serpent power and all the other fanciful names for Oriental works that are anatomically directed, there is practically no mention of the vagus nerve because of the reasons I have given you. In the solar system, and tonight we have to think, because we're talking about ecstasy, an ecstasy which is shared by the neophyte, you, and the divine. Ecstasy is something bigger than anything that we can imagine in our material world, and it is distinct from it. That is the uniqueness of it. It is non-material, and it is quite distinct from man, and far from it being outer, it is inward. And so these alternatives to the frightful conditions of living that man has evolved through on this planet alone attract certain individuals, the mystical few. The vagus nerve is said to be the physiological key to superconscious experience. The physiological key. But remember that we live within the body of a greater being. The planetary lord, lady I should say, Gaia. And Gaia is no new concept, much as I don't wish to detract from the sunshine halo which the modern scientist has assumed because of his book on Gaia. It's not a new concept, it's a very old concept. All things live. All things live within the body of a greater being. The first postulates of my book, The Jewel and the Lotus, written in 1972. the planetary logos, a living entity of which we're a part. But his evolvement is not much concern to us, and I don't want to upset the environmentalists tonight. What concerns us is the spiritual being in our solar system, the solar logos, the grand man of the heavens, he who resides behind the disk of the sun and finds his expression throughout our solar system, modest in size though it may be. The solar logos, in him we live and move and have our being. The great being behind the disk of the sun that Akhenaten, the Pharaoh of Egypt, tried to reach, tried to direct his people towards, and from which the Hebrew religions evolved. And so we ask ourselves, if this is a being, our solar system, are there sacred tissues in his body? And there are extensive ones. We call them the sacred planets, the 7 sacred planets. When we begin our astrology classes, our seminars, we take into account the nature of the 7 sacred planets of our solar system, of which the Earth is not one. Will be, but is not as yet. Will be when a large enough body of mystics are able to meditate in such a way to produce teleological changes on the Earth. And so we say that just as the 7 sacred planets express the qualities of the heart of the sun and the central spiritual sun in the outside of part of our solar system, the periphery of our solar system, so too man has a sacred part of his physical body, which we call the vagus nerve. And it is capable, as I said, of receiving solar fire and electric fire from the core of the sun. It is our duty to change the physical body in such a way to make it a better habitation for the indwelling soul, if you like, higher self. And by our spiritual disciplining through things like vegetarianism, abstinence, celibacy, and so on, the vagus nerve is greatly stimulated, changed, and enables us to monitor, to assist in the changing of the content of our physical body. Does not mean to say that solar elementals cannot be attracted into the other tissues of the body. They can. The other important thing to remember about the vagus nerve is that it is the counter. It is the counter to the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is our link with our animal forebears. That part of our nature which has become so much below our consciousness in the subconscious that we no longer take it much into account, and that's as it should be. A person rushing around with an upset sympathetic nervous system, sweating profusely, crying, weeping, distraught, you name it, all the emotional foibles, is a person not ready for spiritual unfoldment. The vagus nerve would have no chance against that sympathetic nervous system. It would not be able to do what it is spiritually meant to do, to act as the psychic aerial of the body. the psychic aerial of the being, the vagus nerve. And so we have now looked at the structure which is responsible for apprehending spiritual forces like Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, and assisting those spiritual forces to come right down into the depth of our body. Remember that at night the sympathetic nervous systems are very active indeed, very active indeed. They respond to dreams. They respond to visions, to out-of-body experience. If you've had a buffeting in the astral world, and you're coming back into your body, you can feel the pulsation of the carotid arteries hammering that, with perhaps a slightly raised blood pressure. The sympathetic nervous system is very, very active during the sleeping state. And the parasympathetic nervous system is 90% vagus nerve. 90% vagus nerve. You have only to view, for scientific purposes, the male body through the night to see what the sympathetic nervous systems do to it. The fact of the male is that what the nervous systems do to him is visible. It doesn't mean to say that there are not similar activities going on in the female. And so we are talking about a very intimate, important structure in man. The matter of the ecstasy arises because the force that produces the ecstasy is fire. It's a fiery force that flows into the human aura and takes a course which comes from the surface of the brain, the cerebral cortex, is picked up in the region of the hypothalamus, or floor of the midbrain, and through the medial longitudinal bundle enters the medulla or root of the brain. And this is a cross-section of the root of the brain. There's the stalk of the brain going right down the spine. And at a cross-section of the root of the brain, you have this structure here. And this ventricle containing spinal fluid bathes the surface of this area. And these two green structures shown here are called the medial longitudinal bundles, and they have received the fire which is applied to man's cortex and which is apprehended by the medial longitudinal bundles, which end up here, and they lie adjacent to the root of the vagus nerve on both sides of the brain. There emerges the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve. And so these two roots, you won't be able to see this, but there are two roots coming out of the brain of the vagus nerve. They come down the neck on both sides, next to the large arteries, and they provide processes to certain regions, many of them in the body, but most of these regions have esoteric significance. Most of these regions, unlike other nerves in the body, have esoteric significance. You can feel in the ecstatic experience, especially when a master intervenes, you can feel he will move the flow of fire around on the cortex of the brain. He knows the human body, of course. He knows what regions need to be reached, and the surface of the brain, the cortex of the brain, is like a map unrolled, containing all the different parts of the body on that map. And he may reach a part of the body which is infected, a part of the body that is overexcited, a part of the body that needs stimulating, which needs to coordinate with the spiritual effort of the individual. And so the fire, which is a natural phenomenon, can be concentrated and can be allocated to this map of man's body, which is spread out in folds on the cortex of the brain. But where the fire is gathered is here, where the midbrain gives way to the stalk of the brain, the medulla, and down the medial longitudinal bundles here in green, the fire reaches the stalk of the brain and is transferred from there to the vagus nerves, which continue down the neck, and they give off important branches. There is a branch to the carotid body in the neck, which is the endocrine gland corresponding to the outer major chakra that we have discussed in the past, the winged wheel that rotates sagittally here between the angles of the jaw. If you run an axle through the angles of the jaw, you have the outer major center there, and its endocrine gland is the carotid body supplied by the vagus nerve. So that may be reached by fire, spiritual fire. There is a branch that goes to the uvula. The uvula is the little tongue at the back of the mouth. When the doctor looks inside your mouth, he sees the uvula in the center above the root of the tongue. And when he asks you to say ah, by asking you to say ah, the tongue raises itself and wiggles. And that means, yes, your 10th cranial nerve is working well. If it wiggles this way or that way, it means that one of the vagus nerves may well be not functioning properly. But that is quite an important structure to a person like me, because the soft palate there is a place that can give you a psychic warning of infection at least 36 hours before the infection will normally show itself. And the result of that is an itchy palate, an itchy soft palate. The itchy soft palate, you find yourself rubbing the palate with the surface of the tongue, tells you that there is a non-self invasion. And that can also be effective when you meet somebody, or when you enter an unsavory psychic region or place, or enter the aura. You can get reactions just there. So the other parts that are reached by the vagus nerve are a branch to the ear. And it may well be that the voice of the silence, the psychic voice, is a structure in dark matter, subtle matter, which has a surfacing where the vagus nerve reaches the ear. And it may well be that the voices heard, as if they're in the ear, can be through the activity or the flow of fire with a voice imposed on it to that region. There is a branch of the vagus nerve to the larynx. Incredible when you look at the anatomy of it. Looks as if the vagus nerve went all the way down, and the moment that man tried to speak or seemed to speak, it came up and supplied it. The evolution of it is impossible to describe in terms of Darwinism or embryology. But it's there. And of course, a great part of man's effort, especially as it is emphasized in the East, in the Orient, is the ability to create sound, to choose the sounds that you do create, and to infuse meaning and intent into the sounds in what we call mantras, which are then repeated and repeated and repeated so that a morphogenic field is laid down. And anybody who takes up the mantra will have the benefit of reaching the morphogenic field which has been established for countless centuries by spiritual beings sounding those mantras. The vagus nerve passes branches then to other structures of importance, especially to the lungs. Especially to the lungs. The lungs, of course, as we know so well, are an important part. They're an important part of the breathing mechanisms used in spiritual unfoldment. And so here are the two roots of the lungs there. That have the bronchus coming in there like that. But this whole area here is a plexus of the vagus nerve. It's a plexus of the vagus nerve. I'll use this color if you don't mind. So here's your vagus nerve, comes down, forms a plexus here at the root of the lung where the bronchus goes in, and those areas are susceptible to stretching. Not to oxygen, to prana, which we know anyway, but to stretching. And when the exercises involve taking in a deep breath and a retained kumbhaka, the fibers are stretched. There is a stimulus to the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve passes this kind of effect on to other structures. And one of the other structures involved is, of course, the heart, is the heart itself. The heart itself is innervated from the vagus nerve. And if you stimulate the vagus nerve, it will slow the heart. It will slow the heart down. And one of the devices of yoga was to obtain control over the heart, to slow it down so that man could take control of his physical body. You may have heard all sorts of wonderful ideas about why man sat in asanas, in postures, in yoga. But the main reason why he sat in postures was in order to withdraw from the physical body, which was tormented. Not so much today, tormented by flies and insects and a shabby standard of living, and so on. And by adopting certain postures and concentrating on the particular posture, attention was taken away from the pestering insects and other matters concerned with the environment. So here we have the respiration, the breathing mechanisms of the body under the vagus nerve. And the most powerful breath from our point of view in spiritual unfoldment is the bellows breath. And the bellows breath is a most important device for psychic self-defense. It is an important device for obtaining the wherewithal, the will factor in astral projection, and so on. The heart is equally important. It is believed by anatomists that there is a thread of the vagus nerve going to the thymus gland, which is another endocrine gland, and corresponds to the heart chakra. And the thymus gland and the heart chakra are responsible for the detection and defense of the body against invasion, for the production of antibodies against bodies that invade our structure. Not self, we call it, the not self. Then you can take the fibers of the vagus nerve, and they will be traced, can be traced down to the liver, the spleen, the stomach, and some even believe the kidney. At a deeper level, the vagus nerve joins up with a parasympathetic outflow in the lumbar region and therefore reaches the sexual organs through it. And so you have this huge ramification of the vagus nerve, which is not anatomically even dissected now yet, indicating its magnificent location in amongst the tissues, organs of the body where we are, where we exist, as it were. So that is the actual anatomy of the subject. Let us look into this ecstasy. Not just superconscious experience, but ecstasy. And like anything that is mystical, we struggle to express it because it's ineffable. We haven't got the words for it. We are a material existence, and we're talking about a non-material structure which is bigger than us. It is immortal, which excites the curiosity of the mystic. It is compensatory. It is spiritually elevating. It somehow gives meaning to what is unfathomable in our material world, such things as all the wrong people have got the money in the world. Unfathomable things like that. If I can do nothing else, I want you to go away with something very, very thought-provoking here. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy body shall be full of light. Matthew 6, I think. Thy body shall be full of light. They don't lie. these mystics, when they tell us that the body can be filled with light. History records thousands of examples testified by a huge spectrum range of minds, doctors, lawyers, politicians, clerics, saints, philosophers. It runs right through the lot of them, this testimony that there is such a thing as an inner radiance. And I hang mine on at the end. I always call it a light that is 10,000 times brighter than the brightest sun. If you looked straight at the sun, you might lose your sight, burn the retina out. If you looked at a sun 10,000 times as bright as the sun we know, you'd have no eyesight left. Of course, there are inner organs of spiritual perception. Don't think that there isn't a sun 10,000 times brighter than ours. Physically, there is. Sirius is. Immense structure. The spiritual home of mankind. The spiritual home of mankind. Yes. But when we talk about, when we refer to the New Testament quotation here, if thine eye be single, the body shall be full of light. The eye being single does not mean, of course, that put one of your eyes out. But it is worth remembering that even if you had one eye, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. We live in a world that is blind. Cannot, will not see anything else. And so the point that I'm making is that light and the organs that perceive light, the outward light and the inward light, are very important from a spiritual analogy, point of the spiritual analogy. Now you all know the analogy that Plato gave with regard to the cave, and I don't want to dwell on it, but I must mention it for the sake of those who perhaps don't know of its spiritual implication. You go to a university, they won't tell you anything of the esoteric implication, Plato's cave. Plato's cave was meant to show how ridiculous it is for the materialists to believe that they had the answers to everything. He suggested that in a great underground cave there was a wall, a rocky wall, like that, and seated in front of it there were individuals chained to the floor. They were chained to the floor in such a way they could only look ahead of them, and all they could see was this wall, except for the fact that behind them somewhere there was a fire, a light. And eventually, because of their posture, they believe, because they can see nothing else, that they are the shadows on the wall. They are the shadows on the wall. And century after century goes by, and there is that current belief that that is the true world. The material rock but its shadowy form on it is the true world, our world. But Plato says that there are other things. There is a bridge behind, and from this other region people carry objects, baskets to market, and these too are reflected on the wall. And so there is all the paraphernalia of our world is believed to be the only existence as a shadow. But he says, say if one day one of these men were released, I'm going to be very quick about it and say a mystic is released from his position, and he's disenchanted with what he sees on the wall. He is released and he is allowed to turn round, and he sees for a moment the light that is responsible for everything being existing on that wall. And he, by means of questioning, Socrates would do, he said, what would be the effect of that light on him? Oh, the man would be blinded by it, never having seen a light so bright. Indeed he would. Now he says, say that this man were taken from the cave and led up. Eventually, he said, his idea of the light would be acceptable. His eyes would grow used to it. Then he's taken up a long pathway out of the cave through an opening in the cave at the top, high up in the cave. What would his experience be when he went out through the opening of the cave into the sunlit world? What would he think of trees? What would he think of other objects up there that were in other dimensions compared to the ones that he saw on the flat wall of the cave? And stupendously, what would be the effect of his seeing the cause of all this, the sun itself in the heavens, which has produced the tree through photosynthesis? Well, Plato didn't say that, but that's what was implied. Marvelous analogy, not really taken in and understood by the teachers of philosophy. Now, I want to give you an analogy which was given to me 40 years ago. You know what our human body is. You know what it's made up of. You have seen the lungs here and the heart. We have a nervous system. Where are the rest of my drawing? Never mind. We have a we have a blood system. And the different organs of the body, like the lungs and the stomach and the intestines and so on, are fed with a blood supply. It comes out of the heart. Here's the heart here. And the blood comes out of the heart in a great big arch, and it supplies all the organs of the body. No organ in the body can exist without a blood supply. And so the blood goes round the body, and it comes back by means of a venous system, which brings the blood back from the capillary beds, and the head as well, and brings it back to the heart as blue blood, we say. All right, from there the blue blood goes into the lungs, it's oxygenated, and it comes back as red blood into the heart again and is pumped. And so that's the circulation. Fine. Let us imagine that you are a cell in the body of this great being. A cell. Not a hair cell or a bone cell, but you're a blood cell. You're a blood cell in the body of this great being. A blood cell in the body of this great being. So here's a blood cell and another. Sometimes they stick together. Those are the red blood cells of the body. Their job, and they have a job to do, is to feed oxygen to the tissues. They feed oxygen to the tissues accept the oxygen, and eventually they come back to the heart, exhausted of oxygen, and they turn a brownish, bluish color, if you like. And from the heart, the cells are pumped into the lungs, where they get more oxygen, and then they come back into the heart and they do another day's work. That's not hard to imagine. Call it the circulation, we'll call it 24 hours in the life of a blood cell. The blood cell is a sentient, living thing. May I have a duster, please? Never mind. 24 hours in the life of a blood cell. Not hard to imagine. Living within the body of a greater being. Now let's look at one of the most developed, spiritually developed organs in the body of that greater being. The eye. Here is the eye of this being. We'll put it up here. Quite easy to draw. There is an eye. There is a lens. There are the cells at the back of the eye that pick up the light which is coming into the eye. There's the light coming into the eye. There are the cells at the back that pick it up, the light, and they transfer electrical messengers to the brain to tell the brain what is being seen. So the back of the eye has got a blood supply, and all over it there are blood vessels. But there is a part of the eye which is different, and that is known as the macula, where the blood vessels thin out. The little round patch about the size of a pinhead at the back of the eye. There it is there. And this macula has got very, 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 very thin blood vessels. Tiny capillaries where only one blood vessel can get through at a time. And here there is a center where the most vivid of light impressions can be apprehended, where you can see things most clearly. A tiny little space in the middle of all these blood vessels at the back of the eye, and there's the optic nerve bringing blood vessels in with it. Now let us structure this a little bit. Let us structure it a little bit. Here's the light coming in. There are the cells at the back of the eye, and in amongst them there is a particular capillary and a blood cell. There's the capillary arching over the region, and it's so tiny, that capillary, that only one blood cell can fit into it at a time. I mean, dimension-wise. There are others, of course, and they are passing through that region. A blood cell is a very, very tiny thing. You can barely see it with a microscope. And so that is a different part of the body of this great being. Let us say now that the red blood cells do their work each day. They come out of the heart loaded with vitality, with oxygen, and their day is 22 seconds. They're throwing oxygen out to the tissues, delivering it like a delivery boy, and the tissues accept it. Comes back, goes through the heart like we sleep at night. The heart, lungs, refreshes, next day out again. That's not hard to remember or to accept. But now let's say that one of these red cells, by virtue of his self-discipline, is able to make himself malleable. Remember the word malleable. He is malleable. He can slip through tiny spaces that other cells would not normally get through. And so, by virtue of these various factors, instead of him just coming up with red cells into the head through the carotid artery and its branches, by some strange set of circumstances, the cell is able to branch off from the main artery and pass through various smaller arteries through this capillary. And as he moves, he suddenly reaches this position, which is the focal point for an image, a light image, seen by the one in whom he lives and moves and has his being, through the lens of this eye, through the lens of this structure. Something, as an image, has come through and is concentrated to a fine point, like we can see the full stop in a book that we're reading. And at that moment he is deluged with a light, not like the light that he experienced as he went through the arteries of the hand, even though the sun was penetrating them slightly, like the fire at the back of the cave. But suddenly he is placed in a position where he gets light direct. He is confronted with this only for a few moments. The next thing is he's back in circulation with all the other guys, and he says to them, I had an experience last night. It was the most extraordinary thing. I dreamt that there was a light 10,000 times brighter than the brightest sun. It struck me. I was knocked to my knees. And when I looked up, there was this tremendous thing in front of me. And then I was back again. Well, what do you think the other guys would say to you? You're mad. You're crazy. Get away from me. I don't want you near me. Especially if he said to them, come, I'll show you the way. I'll show you how to get there. I've seen it. That is the experience of the superconscious state. But what is the ecstasy? What is the position of that cell? He can look out of the system of which he is a part. He's only a cell in the body of a greater being. Now he's in a position to see out of the greater being and the direction in which that being is moving. Is able to perceive why that being is moving as he is in a certain direction, perhaps to avoid a tree or a post. He shares something of the consciousness of that greater being, remembering that the eye is part of the brain. He shares in the consciousness of a greater being. And what power he feels whilst he is there, to know that he is part of this immense being and he is contributing to that being's existence. In him he lives and moves and has his being and knows something of the plan. and the power that is felt, and the omniscience. He not only can see the direction in which, but he may even share something of the consciousness of that greater being. Initiation. It is part of that which we call ecstasy. And very frequently the ecstatic experience is accompanied by light, omniscience, omnipotence, and somehow the capacity to manipulate time. Three things which are part of that experience. Omniscience, all-knowing; omnipotence, all power to do; and the ability to manipulate time. Because the time there, what wouldn't he have to crowd in to those seconds that he spent there in order to describe what it was that he saw and experienced and felt? Now, no matter what religion you go into, no matter what branch of mysticism, you will always find that the factor of ecstasy is common to all of them. They may not admit it, they may not even know it, but underlying everything, there is this tendency towards wanting to unite, to have union with the divine. And an expression of having union with the divine, of becoming the cell in the brain, in the consciousness of the divine or part of the divine, is what we've been talking about all night. Many of the religions, organizations for mystical purposes, talk like Lao Tzu, the great Chinese mystic, talked of the Tao as being a way. It's a way or a path. And you need to detach the idea that ecstasy, that you're no damn good if you haven't achieved the most ecstatic union. Ecstasy is a constant thing that can flow through you, if you will permit it to flow through you. It can flow through you. It implies a code of behavior. That's what the Tao implies, a code of behavior. And the whole purpose of the Tao, the way, the path, is to bring heaven and earth closer together, which was equally the intention of Paracelsus, the Western mystic. And so underlying all these aspects of mysticism, there is ecstasy and the desire to bring art and power into manifestation. The art shows itself through the magician, and the Taoists believe that power showed itself through the chief executive, who was the king. Lao Tzu also used the Tao to describe ineffable reality. He couldn't describe it in ordinary words, the reality he experienced there. Imagine the self being aware of something of the intention of the Logos, compared to bustling around with somebody else in the arteries day in and day out. And the cell achieves it through self-discipline and the ability to be malleable, to change your way of thinking, to change your attitudes, not to be caught up with the little narrow bourgeois. That's the word for it. I hope we don't lose that with communism. The bourgeois attitudes. At 12 you go to high school. At 14, 15, 16 you go to college. At college you meet a nice girl, you get engaged, you get married, you get a nice job, you have children, you have christening, you have bourgeois. See? And before, it was a very good thing to talk about proliferating on the planet, adding to the planet's population. There were so many wars. But today that is not patriotic anymore. The population of the earth is just exploding, and there is time and opportunity for people to exercise new attitudes, to spread their minds, to find the way to the stars, if you like. And so the Taoists believed in, through trance ecstasy, to get contact with the origin of the universe, the origin of things. Take that analogy further. Say you're down in amongst the cells, and this week you're going to deliver them to the kidney. The kidney's got to get more oxygen. Why has the kidney got to get more? I don't know why we have to go around doing this all day, every day, delivering oxygen to this damned part of the organization, moaning and groaning, and then it gets worse, and they're delivering it much faster, and the pressure and the tension in the blood system is increasing all the time. And you don't know why. You don't know anything about causes. But if you're up at the top there, and by virtue of your disciplines, you are accepted into that region of cells and brain consciousness, you would know why. You'd know that your solar logos has got a karma. He's got a karma. And that he's a fugitive from justice. And that every now and again he's being chased, and because of his karma, all the cells of his body have to suffer for it. They have to go without food while they're being chased, while they're a fugitive. That's why I say to you, I can only give you the seed thoughts. What you have to do is to take those back with you. When you get some peace and quietness, and you should be able to get it, you should practical peace and quiet, then there's time to expand on this and see what the influence of karma is. What is the karma of our solar logos? The karma of our planet is pain. The karma of our planet is pain. And there are some of us who know that we can take the load of pain off the backs of some individuals because they can't bear it. But there are other individuals who have been perhaps to the top there, who know that the more pain they can suffer, the less there is for others to suffer. Because there's so much karma, so much pain karma for our planetary logos. Do you want to have the ecstasy of Christian mysticism? Very easy. Next time you've got pain, and it would depend on how much pain you've had in this life as to how successful you will be. The next time you have pain, you go into a meditative state and take your pain and bathe yourself in it and accentuate it as much as you can with your own mind. I don't expect you to pick up a knife and make the wound bigger. I mean, with your own mind, live that pain out, and then go through all the other pains that you've suffered in your life. The pain of a perforated lung, the pain of being burnt or scalded, the pain of spiritual pain, of separation or death or whatever, and live out these pains and see what it does to your spiritual life. And the longer that you can do it in that session, you won't be able to do it again for some time, but the longer you can do it in that session, the more likely you are to have a Christian mystical experience involving ecstasy. Why? Because the whole of the Christian religion is centered around a being who is crucified. He is the symbol of pain. And the Christian religion was meant to lessen the karma of the planet with regard to pain. And so the divine gave his only son, in the sense that he gave part of himself to the absorption of pain. And if there was so much pain that all of us had to share here, and one of us came along and took much more than our share, what would happen to the rest of us? We would have less pain. Why the churches of Christianity don't see it, I don't know. They never teach it. They teach it in a roundabout way. But why they have to do it like they do, I can't understand, nor does the public understand. The attendance at churches is shrinking. Whereas if they could explain karma, reincarnation, the ability to come back again and again and share in the good and the difficulties, the evils, the karma of the planet, and to do it consciously, it's a great thing. And that's the reward that is given. This is a rewarding system, this universe. We don't quite know why, because so much unhappiness and so many terrible things, but nevertheless, the powers that be in the universe have a rewarding system. And they do it right through all the kingdoms, even into the fifth kingdom. So, in the process of becoming one, unifying yourself with the higher being, you share in a universal principle, and you, of course, experience something of ecstasy. What is the universal principle according to the Theists? The universal principle of the Theists is that all is change. There is nothing permanent. Everything changes. And everything is transformed. Nothing is static. Nothing endures forever, ever. All is change. Now you look around, those you know in this life, and see how hard they react to change in circumstances. From employment to unemployment. From being respected to being regarded with contempt, and so on. And really, when people say that the earth is a hard place to live in, and that they realize that it's a learning place, a learning ground, it's rare for them to know that one of the things that you have to learn on earth, as the Buddha used to teach, is to learn that all is change. All is change. I tremble in my boots when I think of some of the rude awakenings that are going to occur when people go out there into the other world, the world that is not finite and three-dimensional. And they look out at that, and they will think, my God, what chaos! But chaos to us is not necessarily chaos to the gods. The gods see things very, very differently indeed. I've begged you many times to read and meditate on the comment that J.B. Priestley made when he was ringing birds on God's Hill and had a dream that night. Now the Taoist saints believe that by quietude and by purity, and through avoiding distractions in your life, you can clear a place inside of you, a hollow, a vacuum if you like. You can clear a place inside you. It is empty of impurity, and this emptiness fills. It fills with original energy, the kind of energy that Priestley was talking about. And if you can create it and not allow the objects of the senses to encroach on it, then that emptiness will be filled with the fire behind all things, or the life force behind all things, the very principle of life. The Taoists believe that the average man, the ordinary man, starts off with this reservoir as a child and slowly empties it for the rest of his life. But those who are spiritually motivated and take the way can fill that constantly with a liquid fire that I have been talking about tonight. Liquid fire that can be drawn on. And many people have this ability. It is said to be a quality of the true saint. The reservoir in the true saint is constantly maintained. Outwardly, he is seen as this. Externally, he has a healthy, flourishing appearance. Inside him is contained this ever-flowing source of energy. It manifests itself in a radiance. It manifests in his teaching and in his healing. It powerfully affects and benignly influences his surroundings, and all this efficacy is Tao. And so, whether you're looking at J.B. Priestley, mystical for a period stimulated by the ringing of birds, or you're looking at the yin-yang of Tao, or whether you're looking at the caduceus of Western medicine, whatever you're looking at, if it's mystical, there is an element of ecstasy in it. And that ecstasy is available to every one of you. Sometimes it may appear to be too much, blowing your top, as it were. You don't know what to do with it. The moment that you are aware of it, you know that you must express it in some way. Express, express, express. I'm here for you to express. I am the cause of, I am the basis of all things in the universe. I use form. Express me in whatever form or shape you may. All right? Thank you.